Hi, my name is Will Scott. I'm an engineer at Protocol Labs. I'm on the Bedrock team, and we deal with a bunch of the data transfer protocol, IPFS. The Bedrock team is also responsible for development on Boost, the market's implementation of the reference Lotus Filecoin system. And so we're thinking a lot about how storage providers store and retrieve data. And so I wanted to take this time to talk about a bunch of the different threads that are going on around retrieval right now, how I'm thinking about improving retrieval on the Filecoin network, and how we get to a world where there is an incentivized retrieval that leads to sort of a positively reinforcing loop. So broadly speaking, there's sort of four parts to the retrieval work that's going on. The first one is maybe where the least code needs to happen, but really is an alignment of the community, and that's around the specifications and the standards, and just getting to expectations around what we mean when we talk about retrieval. When we look at sort of client expectations, often those aren't technical, right? Clients just want their retrieval to work, but they care a lot less, certainly as you get further away from the engineering, about what it actually means when they say that. And so we've got a bunch of work around having sort of concrete technical things that help us to understand what we're saying and if we're living up to the expectations. The next part is we need to get better at measuring and really enforcing that retrieval. And so we need to have ways for clients that are doing retrievals to be saying whether it met the expectation that was in place or not. And we need to sort of be thinking about what that sort of telemetry and understanding of retrieval performance actually looks like as a system. Once we have data flowing around the retrievals that are happening, there's some work on the sort of data processing pipeline that comes into play. So you'll get a lot of different clients that are sending streams of data about how well retrieval is working for them, and all of them will have partial views of the network. And so then there's some process by which we stitch together these partial views and get back to sort of overall senses of reputation and how well a storage provider is living up to this full set of their commitments and the expectations that they've claimed to fulfill around retrieval. And so we want to get to that analysis to feel pretty solid and trustworthy, and to be able to get relatively compact representations of how well participants are providing retrieval as a thing that can be used from subsequent derived decisions. And so one of the things there is that overall data, like a reputation score, probably needs to live on chain, so that it has it becomes a number, and hopefully it's a single number. Although there may be a couple, right? So you could imagine just a single number of reputation and a ranking of storage providers. You could also imagine that for a storage provider, you can access the expected latencies and bandwidth throughputs that those providers are able to provide right now, along with something around sort of a percentage reliability. Like what would the P95 latency be? And then as we have that data in a way that we can trust, then we can start to think about incentivization directly. And so how do we then set up incentives so that we push retrieval performance to get better? So those are the four components, and I can talk a little bit more and dive slightly deeper into what's going on in each of them. So for developing expectations, we're working on trying to understand a little bit better what are the SLAs that we should set, and then also how do we make sure that that clients, as they store data, are setting in a visible place what their expectations of retrieval for that data are. Right now, when we look at a sample of contracts that are occurring between clients and storage providers, and the types of data, we find a couple things. One is that a lot of that data is archival. And what that means is that there's not an expectation of getting it back very many times or by very many clients, and also that the latency doesn't matter a ton. But there still is some SLA. Like if you ask for the data, you do want it back. And so we can start to talk about this in terms of how many times does it need to be able to be retrieved during the period of storage, and with what bandwidth, right? And so we can say things like, I need to be able to get it back at least 1 megabit per second, 95% of the time. Things of that nature are going to let us to encode what current data is, and then also provide a framework for which we can start talking about, well, I want to now start storing hot data that I expect to be accessed by a CDN or accessed by users of my site, and I want to have this data be stored, and maybe it costs more to store it, but I want it to be stored with the expectation that it's going to be retrieved every day instead of maybe a few times over its lifetime. And so figuring out what these common buckets of retrieval usage will be, we're working with some of the sort of existing subsystems. So with the Saturn team on how many times Saturn is likely to need to cache miss for data that becomes accessed at a CDN level. So how often they'll want to go back to the origins. And from that, we're going to try and back out at least an initial set of sort of these SLA levels. And that lets us have an expectation and then understand if that expectation is being met. A lot of the work that's happening right now is on the measurement side. Today, there's a reputation working group, which has a bunch of different parties that are running a validation bot, which will download data that's been stored through Fill+, and confirm that it can get that data and that data looks correct. And those reports are getting stored up and being used already for a set of analysis outcomes. And so one of those is that when a client applies for data cap, the notaries on GitHub, and you can look at this, it's on the public GitHub threads that happen there, notaries are shown from an automatic bot whether the SPs that have previously been engaged are allowing for retrieval of the previous data. And so it's helping to address data sets that are being put up multiple times where there are issues with retrievability. Right now, that's at a very rough granularity, and so SLAs are going to play into being able to get a finer grained answer here. While we have validation bots today, these are also pretty centralized, and so we can ask a bunch, is this really going to be a model that lasts? And so there's a development effort that's coming out of the Filecoin Station team called Spark, which is a retrieval validation in a decentralized way. And in fact, it's going to be about getting a desktop client that anyone can run with a target of tens of thousands of users that all participate in doing spot retrieval attempts. And so by having a lot of different clients doing retrieval, we believe that there's a protocol that is getting designed still, but looks quite promising around how that set of retrieval validations can lead to an overall aggregation and analysis to say whether retrieval of that content was possible at a given time window or not, in a way that's difficult to game by any participant. So a lot of the thought here is, can this be fairly non-permissioned, fairly decentralized, while still having relatively good Sybil resistance and make it difficult for anyone to game. Reporting and retrieval is happening. A mix of these logs are going to likely live in a sidechain. There's a previous and sort of ongoing design called Pando about what a sidechain metadata store can be for authenticated data. So while each individual validation bot or each individual desktop client may be able to sign its individual reports, that ends up being a lot of data, and you don't want to get all of that data on chain. But you can develop deterministic processes by which that data can get processed by multiple parties, and they can all agree on the overall outcome of running that computation. And so that can lead to things like a reputation score or an understanding of what retrieval bandwidths and latencies are being realized. And then finally, we have the incentivization. And again, there's a couple different paths here. One is that incentivization lives as a supplemental contract. And so there may be an FVM smart contract where a client, when it's storing data and wants to make sure that that data is retrievable, can put some additional pile of funds in a contract where those funds are released as the storing SP meets retrieval expectations. The nice thing about this model is that it gives us some of the flexibility that we expect to have with retrieval. And so likely some component of this will exist. And so one particular thing is that you can imagine is that retrieval expectations are going to potentially change at a different rate than storage expectations. I can put some content on and not necessarily have a great sense of is that content going to be super popular or not. And then if it later becomes really popular, I may want to pay to support the additional retrieval bandwidth that it's going to cost to continue serving that content at the higher level of service. Either the content becomes more important or the content becomes more popular. And so an additional contract where there can be subsequent funding and incentives to increase and renegotiate is a useful flexibility. At the same time, there's a level of retrieval that we also strongly believe is really a core expectation around Filecoin. Filecoin is a storage and retrieval network. And a lot of the utility and benefit that allows Filecoin to be sustainable because of the expectation of what sorts of data you actually want to store in a decentralized network involve at least some level of retrieval. And so we'd like to see these reputations and the understandings of meeting the expectations of retrieval on deals go into things like the network subsidies on block rewards. Right, that the network is subsidizing data that it believes is important. The way that someone lives up to storing that data and making it useful is by providing retrievals as well as the storage itself. And so we see this this overall full loop of having an understanding of how retrieval is going for a given deal with a given provider as being integral to that process of incentivization of the network as a whole. So that's sort of the 10-minute version of what's going on with retrieval. I'm happy to take any questions, online or offline. I'll be at some of the events over the next months and look to engage further. Thank you.